Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel, and I'm really excited to have you here for another video. Now, before we move on to today's content, there's a few housekeeping items that we need to go over, so let's take a look at what some of those are. I have been getting messages from people all over the world about different opportunities. While I'm very excited to get your message about the opportunity, the best way you can get in contact with me is by clicking the link in the description. In the description below, you'll find a link for an opportunity discussion where you can book time on my calendar. When you click that link, it'll take you directly to my calendar. You'll have the most up-to-date information. You'll be able to put in your name, email, preferred method of contact, and a little short summary about what opportunity you have. After confirming and submitting, you'll receive a calendar invite where you and I can both talk. And during this time, you can go ahead and tell me all about your opportunity, and hopefully it's a good fit. So make sure you click the link in the description, and I look forward to speaking with you soon. With all the housekeeping items out of the way, let's get into today's content. Welcome back to the channel, and welcome back to another video. Really excited to have you guys here for another episode. Now, I want to talk to you guys about something that happened recently. I had a customer who wanted me to work on their computer, and they wanted me to restore the computer back to factory default. So one of the options that you can use in order to restore a computer back to factory default is by using the recovery media that was given to the customer when they had purchased their computer. Now, as usual, this customer lost their recovery media, so I couldn't restore the computer using their recovery media because obviously they didn't have it. Of course, that doesn't stop us from fixing the problem because, as you know, or if you don't know, we can make our own recovery media, which in my opinion anyways, is much better than having the recovery media from the manufacturers. Now, why is it better, you ask? Simply because when you create your own recovery media, all you need to put on there is the operating system, and then you can go and get your drivers afterwards. It's essentially everything that you need in order to get up and running with your computer, and none of the bloatware and none of the extra garbage that computer manufacturers put in their computer in order to get you to buy stuff. Sometimes you just want to get your operating system up and running so you can just do your work and go about your life instead of having another product to market it to you. If you don't know how to recover your computer using your own recovery media, and you're interested in learning about that, there's a link that's going to be put in the description for the video of how to go and recover your computer by creating your own recovery media. It'll walk you through on how to create the recovery media, how to install the operating system, and how to get drivers for your computer so that way you can be up and running should you lose your recovery media. Not only will there be a link in the description, but I'll also put a link in the screen somewhere up here. Now keep in mind, if you don't see the link in the description or if it's not on the screen just yet, we're working on that video and it'll be up as soon as we have that ready for you. After I was done restoring the computer back to factory default, I handed the computer back to the customer, and it was interesting because I received communication from the customer a couple days later. The communication was saying that even though that they appreciated the computer being back to factory default and everything was great, they couldn't help but notice that the computer was a little bit slow. Don't take my word for it. Let me show you what I mean. So now you see how slow the computer is in order to boot or even just work with it. And I can clearly see the frustration that the customer was having. So how do we go about fixing this? This is where an SSD comes into place, or a solid state drive. So I'm going to show you what the performance looks like after we upgrade to an SSD. And that way you can see how beneficial it is to upgrade your computer to make sure it has an SSD for your everyday computing needs. Huge performance increase. I know. It's incredible the performance you get out of an SSD versus a regular hard drive. Now that you have seen what the performance is before having an SSD and what it looks like after having an SSD. I'm going to show you guys now how we can go about installing it so that way you can learn how to do it and be able to upgrade your laptop with an SSD. Now, before we get into it, there's a couple things that I need from you. Make sure you go ahead and like the video. Make sure you go ahead and subscribe to the channel. And don't forget to turn on your notifications so that way you're notified whenever we upload cool videos like this one. And don't forget to share the video with a friend or family member. It's always good to share this so that way they can learn and it helps the channel grow. Now that you've liked, shared, and subscribed to the video, let's jump in and see how we can upgrade our laptop to have an SSD and get the performance that we were seeing earlier. Welcome to my desktop where you see here HP.com. And of course, we're on HP.com because this is the manufacturer of the laptop that we have. And we want to make sure that we pull up all the necessary information that's needed in order to replace and upgrade our hard drive. Let's gather the information that is needed in order to work on our HP computer. And on HP's website, first thing we click on is the support tab. Now you should have a drop-down menu, and the next item that we click is support and troubleshooting. And once we click on support and troubleshooting, we're going to get to the portion where we get to input our product name. You can do the product name, you can do the product number, or you can do the serial number. So in our case here, I'm going to use the product name. It's going to be an HP Envy notebook, and specifically M7-N109DX. We head over to the support page for this particular laptop, and in the support page under Manuals tab, you're going to see all the manuals that are associated with this particular computer. And the first one is the most important one that we're interested in, and it is the Maintenance and Service Guide. So let's head over to that one. Since we are interested in upgrading the hard drive from a spinning regular hard drive to an SSD, we're of course going to go to the hard drive section of this particular Maintenance and Service Guide. Under the hard drive section here of this Maintenance and Service Guide, it gives you specific instructions on how you go about removing the hard drive. So let's go ahead and follow these steps in order to make sure that we remove the hard drive that's inside the computer and then replace it with the SSD. Now, first step in the process here, and you can see before moving the hard drive, we have to follow these steps. So first step is to turn off the computer. And if you are unsure if the computer is off or not, or if it's in hibernation, you want to make sure that you turn on the computer, let it go into the operating system. And once you're in the operating system, you can shut down the computer from there. So let's go ahead and turn off our computer by shutting it down. Now, second step in the process, as you see here, we have to disconnect the computer from power, and we do that by unplugging the cord from the computer. So let's go ahead and remove the power from the computer. Now, step number 3 is to disconnect all external devices from the computer. So let's go ahead and make sure that we remove all external devices that are connected to the computer. Now, step number 4 is to remove the battery from the computer. And as you can see here, that removing the battery is on page 27. So let's head over to page 27 and follow the steps there in order to remove the battery. So here we are on page 27 of removing the battery. And before we can remove the battery, we have to follow the first 3 steps here. And the first step, of course, is to shut down the computer. Now, we've already done this step from our prior steps that we've worked on. So let's go ahead and go to number 2. And number 2 says to disconnect all external devices that are connected to the computer. Now we've already done this as well, so we can go ahead to step number 3 now. And step number 3 says disconnect the power from the computer, and we have to unplug the AC cord from the outlet and also as well from the computer. Now we can go ahead and skip number 3 because we actually already completed this step. So with steps 1 through 3 complete, let's go ahead and actually remove the battery. And to remove the battery, we're going to have to follow the steps right under the section that says to remove the battery. Step number 1 is to position the computer upside down on a flat surface. So let's go ahead and take care of that. Once we've completed step number 1, let's complete step number 2, And step number 2 says to slide the battery lock latch, which if we follow the figure that's shown below, and I'll show that for you in a second, but number 1 is the latch where we have to slide. And then number 2, once we slide the battery lock latch, then we slide the battery release latch. And then in step number 3, because this all happens simultaneously, step number 3 is to rotate the battery upward. And you can see that by the number 3 in the figure. And then we remove the battery from the computer. So steps 2 and 3 of sliding the battery lock latch and sliding the battery release latch and rotating the battery up and away from the computer, that all happens in one motion. Let's go ahead and implement the steps we learned and remove the battery from the computer. Now we can move on to step number 5 in the hard drive section, and that is to remove the optical drive. And removing the optical drive is located on page 28. So let's head over to page 28 in the manual, where it shows us the steps on how to remove the optical drive. So here we are on removing the optical drive, and there's a couple of things that we have to complete before we remove the optical drive. So step number 1 is to shut down the computer, and we've already taken care of that because we've done it a couple steps ago. We've disconnected all external devices from the computer, so step number 2 is done. We've disconnected power from the computer, step number 3 is done. And we've already removed the battery, which is step number 4. So all the prerequisites have been done, and now we can remove the actual optical drive. So let's jump into those instructions and actually complete them. Step number 1, as you see here, is to remove the cover and then remove the screw that secures the optical drive to the computer. Now I'm going to show you in a quick diagram how to go ahead and remove number 1, which is the cover, and number 2, which is the screw. Step number 2, which is to actually remove the optical drive, and we do that by sliding it out of the optical drive bay. 1 and 2 is remove the cover, remove the screw, and then 3, we're going to remove the optical drive from the optical drive bay. Now that you have seen that diagram, let's go ahead and actually implement it and remove the actual optical drive from the optical drive bay. Heading back to the hard drive section, we've just removed the optical drive, so that was step number 5. Let's move on now to the final prerequisite, which is step number 6, and we're going to remove the bottom cover. And as you can see here, the bottom cover is on page 31. So let's head over to page 31 of the service manual. Now here we are removing the bottom cover. As you can see here, there are prerequisites in order to remove the bottom cover. So let's go over them real quick. Step number 1 is to turn off the computer. That is already done. We've completed that from prior steps. Step number 2 is to disconnect the power from unplugging the cord from the computer. That is done. We've completed that in prior steps. Step number 3 is to disconnect all external devices from the computer. That one's already complete, as we have done that in prior steps. Step number 4 is to remove the battery, and we have already completed that in prior steps, so we can move past that. And finally was step number 5, which is removing the optical drive, and that was completed in prior steps as well. So we can go ahead and wrap up all the prerequisites for removing the bottom cover. So now we can go ahead and actually remove the bottom cover. So let's take a look at step number 1 and how we do that. Step number 1 says to remove the 7 Phillips screws. It calls them out as number 1 in a figure that I'm going to show you in just a second. And then we have to remove 2 screws in the optical drive bay, and of course that's shown as number 2, which secures the cover to the computer. So here's what the diagram looks like, and you can see number 1 screws, and then you can also see the number 2 screws. So let's go ahead and remove all those screws so that way we can start removing the bottom cover. With step number 1 out of the way, let's move on to step number 2. And step number 2 says that we have to remove the 5 Phillips screws, and it's shown as number 1 in the figure. And we also have to remove the 5 screws from the battery bay, and that's shown as number 2. Those 10 screws secure the bottom cover to the computer. So let's go ahead and remove all 10 screws that secure the bottom cover to the computer. Now we move on to step number 3. And step number 3 has us removing the bottom cover by working around to disengage the bottom cover near the battery bay. And then we slide the cover to remove it. So let's go ahead and actually implement that so we can remove the bottom cover. Let's head back to the hard drive section of the service manual. And as you can see, up until this point, we have completed all the prerequisites in order to remove the hard drive. So steps 1 through 6. Now we can actually officially go and remove the hard drive. So let's look at the steps in order to get that done. Step number 1 tells us that we have to disconnect the hard drive cable from the system board. So let's go ahead and take care of that now. So step number 2 of removing the hard drive is we have to remove the 4 screws that secure the hard drive assembly to the computer. So let's go ahead and remove the hard drive assembly by removing those 4 screws. Step number 3 is to lift up the hard drive tab, and we have to remove the hard drive assembly from the hard drive bay. So now that you see step number 3 in the diagram, let's actually implement that. Finally, we have step number 4. And step number 4 says if it's necessary to disassemble the hard drive, which in our case it is, we have to perform the following steps. And A is to remove the 4 screws that hold the hard drive brackets to the hard drive, and B is to disconnect the hard drive connector cable from the hard drive itself. And remember, we are replacing the hard drive, so all of these steps are necessary. So let's go ahead and do that right now. Here in my hand is the old hard drive that we just removed from the computer. Just to note, it's the spinning hard drive, which gives us the slower performance. So let's take a look at what we're going to install on the computer. So here we have an SSD drive, and this is the new hard drive that we're going to put inside of the computer to give us the performance that you saw earlier on in the video. Now I'm going to walk you through on how do you do that. But this time it's going to be at a faster pace because guess what? It's the exact same instructions that we've been following this whole entire time in order to install the hard drive. The only difference is the instructions are backwards. So basically we work our way from the end all the way to the beginning, and that will successfully help us install that hard drive. So let's take a pause here for a second. If you've been following the video, you might be asking yourself, hey,
where is the rest of the instructions of putting on the screws for the cover? I noticed you just put on the cover and that was the end of it. Here is a pro tip, and a pro tip that I'm going to share with you all whenever you're working on computers. We just put on the cover, enough to make sure that the computer doesn't fall apart. Also, it gives us the flexibility of easily removing the cover again. And the reason why we're going to do that is because anytime you get new hardware from manufacturers, you still want to test it out to make sure that the hardware works. We never assume that everything works out of the box. So what we're going to do now is we're going to power on the computer. We're going to go and do a test on the hard drive that we just installed. And then if everything checks out okay and we get a pass on that hard drive, then we can go back and we can put in the final screws to touch everything up and make sure everything is secure. And if you don't pass that hard drive test, you now have the flexibility to just remove the cover easily, take out the hard drive, and replace it with a new one that is actually working. So it's a great practice to give you that flexibility of making adjustments should you need to.
Welcome back. By now, you should have all the information that you need in order to upgrade your computer with an SSD. Now keep in mind, all the information that we learned here was specific towards that laptop, but the process and the procedures don't change. Remember, you can apply to whatever computer you have, and you can see the results after you've installed the SSD. Now keep in mind, don't forget to check out the description because there's a lot of information in there that's helpful in case you might have missed something, or in case you want to see the video of how to restore your computer, creating your own recovery media. If this video has helped you out, don't forget to give me a like. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Also turn on your notification so that way when we upload a video, you're notified, and share it with a family member or friend so that way they can learn how to upgrade their computer with an SSD. So I look forward to seeing you guys in the next video.